The following featured presentation is part of the Skywalking Network.
Welcome to Star Warsologies, the podcast about science and other academic fields of study seen in Star Wars. I'm one of your hosts, James Floyd. I am a freelance writer. I write for Star Wars Insider magazine.
And I'm your other co-host, Melissa Miller. I'm a science writer. In this episode, Star Warsologies is going to share our Los Angeles Comic-Con panel called The Science of Ahsoka. We had a really awesome time at LA Comic-Con, and this panel was a lot of fun. We had great audience engagement and stayed afterwards for 30 minutes to keep answering questions. So we hope you'll enjoy it as much as our audience. We talk everything from purgill to planets with some Star Warsologies favorites. So let's go ahead and get into the panel because it's a long one. Okay, well, this is the Science of Ahsoka, and we are going to talk about this awesome new show, and I've got a bunch of nerds up here with me. I am... And there will be audience Q&A, so feel free to think of some questions and try to stump our chumps up here. I am Melissa Miller. I am a science writer and a podcaster. With James down there, we do the Star Warsologies podcast, which is about science and Star Wars. We've had some of the panelists here on as guests. I also, with Lisa down there, run the Facts and the Furious podcast about science in the Fast and Furious franchise. So, you know, if you're that particular type of nerd, check those out. Paul, let's start with you.
Hi everyone, I'm Paul Wynns. I am a pilot, and I've also worked in the aerospace industry for just about my whole career. I started out as a naval aviator flying jets off of aircraft carriers. I've worked in industry, and these days I co-founded a flight school that we will soon fly some of the world's first all-electric training aircraft. And I'm a huge nerd, and I once may or may not have said Red 5 standing by in Navy Flight School.
Nice.
You probably said it every day.
Hi everybody, my name is Sam Wynns. If that name sounds familiar, yes, this is my lovely husband. I am a conservation biologist with the National Park Service. I work at Cabrillo National Monument in San Diego. It's San Diego's only national park. And I'm also a science educator and an entrepreneur, starting a nonprofit this year to get more diversity into STEM. I'm really excited to be here to geek out with y'all.
Hello everybody, my name is Gabe Santos. I originally trained as a marine mammal paleontologist, so I studied things like whales and got to help describe a cool walrus from California. But since I've switched to science education, so now I get to talk about stories from deep time. So I'm currently the director of education at the Raymond Off Museum of Paleontology. I'm a Grosvenor Teacher Fellow with National Geographic and Lindblad Expeditions. I'm the co-founder of the Cosplay for Science Initiative, and if any of you have ever heard of a cool YouTube show called PBS Eons, I'm one of the new hosts of that show. So like and subscribe. I like Star Wars too.
I'm Dr. Lisa Will. I'm a professor of physics and astronomy at San Diego City College, which is a community college in downtown San Diego. And I'm also the resident astronomer at the Fleet Science Center in Balboa Park.
And I'm James Floyd. I am a freelance writer. I work with Melissa on the Star Warsologies podcast. I write for Star Wars Insider magazine, StarWars.com. Star Wars. Let's get going.
All right, well, Star Wars. Let's start with cats, because, you know, who doesn't love cats? Thankfully, Dave Filoni just came out, I believe, yesterday and said that Sabine's Loth cat is fine. Someone's checking in on it. So that at least answers that question. But Sam, I know you have something to say about their feet and Loth cat stuff in general.
So Loth cats. Pretty plausible, actually, for a lot of reasons. So cats is a really, really great physiology, right? So you find them on every single continent except Antarctica. And even if there aren't any felidae, right, or felines, those in the family of cats, there are animals here on Earth that evolved the characteristics of cats because they're a really good design. They are little murder machines. Yes, even your cute little patches at home is a murder machine, I hate to tell you. So here we have a couple of specimens. Both live here on Earth. Are they both cats? Thumbs up if you think they're both cats. got a lot of thumbs up. Thumbs down if you think they're not loaf cats.
I feel like I learned that from Madagascar.
Very good. Yeah, so thumbs down had it correctly, right? So the one in the upper left corner is an Abyssinian. It's a type of domestic cat. And the one on the bottom screen is actually something called a fossa, which is evolved in Madagascar. It is not at all related to cats. And it's actually part of the weasel family. But you can see it looks very similar to a cat because it is a beautiful design. This is something that happens in nature called convergent evolution, where things design the same features because it works really well for the environment that they live in. So a great example of this would be like flippers on penguins versus flippers on dolphins, right? Like very, very distantly related, but very similar shapes because it works well for them. So same thing here with cats. You have your whiskers, right, which are a great sensory organ. So they're the exact width of their body. Same thing for the fossa and the cat. So they can tell, they can go through narrow spaces. They don't have to even see all that well. They know how close something is to them. And they can also sense something when it's close by, in the slightest breeze. Your tail for balance, right? Your tapetum lucidum, which is that eye shine, which is great for predators, so they can see in the dark very, very well. So it makes sense that there'd be loaf cats, right? That's a really good predatorial form.
But no murder mittens.
Yeah, so that's what's weird about it. Normally you don't see animals that have both fur and scales, because if you look at the loaf cat foot, it is a scaly foot, right? Does anyone know there is one animal on Earth that has both fur and scales? Want to take a guess?
Something in Australia?
It's a good guess.
Okay.
It's called a
Things are just
pangolin.
weird there.
Have you ever seen a pangolin?
Okay.
But what's interesting about the pangolin is it only has fur. Is this taking too long?
No, you're doing it.
I'm going in really deep here. So thanks for nerding out with me. I know, science. This is what I do. I think about these things. This is what keeps me awake at 2 in the morning. The scales are actually great for protection. So they have scales on the outside of their body. When they feel threatened, they will roll into a ball, right? And the scales are made out of keratin or chitin. And fur on the underside of the body to keep them warm. So you don't often see animals that keep themselves warm from the inside with scales. Scales are not very good at doing that, except for birds.
Sweet, yep, birds.
So birds are warm-blooded, right? And they have scaly feet. So I'm not really sure what's going on with the loaf cat. You don't see really mammals with scaly feet. They kind of weird me out too. Have you looked at the loaf cat's feet? But the scales are good for protection against the environment. So I speculate the loaf cats, maybe have to be in water or something that they need that kind of extra barrier, scaly protection.
Gabe, is there anything in the fossil record that sort of weaves these pieces together?
In the fossil record, we don't really see cats with scales. I mean, scales rarely preserve in the fossil record. When things fossilize, they usually have to be like the hard substances of our body, right? So that's like our bones, and when they get fossilized, all that cool organic material gets replaced by minerals, right? And so for us, we have our bones, and when we find them, that lets us know. Some fish have scales preserved, usually like they're really hard, thick armor, but we've never seen scales associated with a cat fossil or a cat-like animal. I mean, the first thing if I found that, I would shut up. I'm making a paper. I'm describing it Lothcathii.
Yes.
But yeah, no, it's not really. But the cool thing we do see, like Sam was talking about, so many amazing instances of convergent evolution, but also cool experiments in nature. There are a lot of really cool animals that have no descendants today, that have maybe bits and pieces of other animals that we can look at and compare to. But the thing is they didn't survive past whatever event or whatever kind of evolutionary pressure, and their lineage just ended, right? So evolution has so many cool experiments that, like Sam said, the loft cat is not outside of that realm of possibility. Mm-hmm. It's just about the randomness of evolution, and some animal that has scales, it evolves fur, and then it gets that cat-like body, because a lot of animals have that cat-like body. So it is not outside of the realm of possibility. One great example is this thing it's not a cat, but it's called bear dog. Bear dogs are anthocyanins, and they have kind of features of both bears and dogs because they are on the lineage of both those animals, just further down. And it has no living descendants today. But if you look at it, it is kind of similar to a Loth wolf, actually. And it has these weird features that we don't see today. So I think that's my favorite thing about seeing some Star Wars creatures is, there's a lot of thought that goes into them that feel real. And being a paleontologist and someone who looks at evolution, we can, and like for Sam, we talk about this a lot. We see these bits and pieces that we pick out, and we're like, that could work, that couldn't work, maybe. But in the end, it's just all fun.
Yeah.
Well, I'm wondering what the evolutionary pressures are to make that happen with a furred mammal with the scaly tail, right?
I had an idea about that.
Yeah.
So, the way that like buzzards and condors have kind of naked heads because it prevents them from getting bacteria and stuff. So maybe in the Loth cats are a subspecies of tucas that they have the same thing. But if there's some environment where it was advantageous to not have fur on their paws, like they were living in a swampy environment, and just like everything above 6 inches was safe, but everything below, is really mucky and gross. That maybe they started off with fur and eventually just drifted away from that.
I like it.
It's plausible.
Oh my gosh! Sorry, I just remembered something. We don't have evidence of like fur mammal lineage, but there are dinosaurs and pterosaurs that have their scales and their feathers have adapted to be sort of fur-like. They're these quill-like substances that are kind of fuzzy. So we have dinosaurs that have something that's furry with scales. So we do kind of have evidence of it in the fossil record, but it's not fur the way that we have fur. So that's why the cloth cap is weird.
Right.
That's a mammal with scales. That's weird. If you have scales, you need to go see a doctor.
All right, well, just in case biology is not your thing, we're going to get into physics here too. So, Lisa, these maps that we see all through Ahsoka are lovely and really cool, but can you tell us what they mean? Would you be able to use such a thing to travel from one galaxy to the next?
Well, first of all, traveling from one galaxy to the next isn't something we can do yet, right? But what I did like about it is that the map had to be used from a specific location because space, believe it or not, does have coordinate systems. Your direction is going to have coordinate systems. And the first time it just makes sense, but the first time I really thought about it, I was an undergrad at UCLA, and I was working with satellite data on the Earth's magnetic field, and the satellites had two different sets of coordinates, one based on the Earth-Sun line and our ecliptic, and one based on the Earth-Sun line and the orientation of our magnetic field. Yeah. And it's like, oh, so there's actually coordinate systems based on what you're studying, but the way we use them, because we're geocentric at heart, right? We're geocentric, they're all based on our point of view. So I think it's interesting that they do have to be at a specific location. How they travel to that one galaxy or the other, well, we can't do that. So, but navigating there, they should be able to do it.
Okay. Paul, as a pilot, if you saw something like this, would you be like, oh yeah, I can totally get us there, no problem, that's a way to navigate?
Well, you'd have to agree on the origin of the coordinate system. What I do really like about it is it's clearly like a spherical coordinate system, which would make for something that would make sense for something that is in 3 dimensions. Like when you navigate on the Earth, you have to use a coordinate system that is essentially the origin is at the core of the Earth, and then you have to agree that there is a certain longitude that you start with, and that's the prime meridian, and then you have to agree that there's a certain latitude that you start with, and that's the equator. So this coordinate system looks kind of like that, but the thing that I was wondering about when I look at this is the only reason why you were able to start actually navigating the Earth in, let's say the origins of the British Empire, like 1700s, when sailing ships were trying to move around the Earth and trying to navigate, you had to know what time it was. That was the crucial question you had to be able to answer, because if you're taking an observation, or if you're looking at this coordinate system that we see in Ahsoka, that's essentially a frozen snapshot of it at a certain point in time, but what time? And so, is there some intergalactic clock reference system that they're using, right? It's kind of left unanswered. Maybe that's part of the magic of what's happening with the with these artifacts that we're seeing. But if you look at a map, the thing that really makes the map work is knowing what time it is. So that was my main question. But it looks cool.
It looks really cool. And we'll get into the purgill later, but my favorite part of these sequences is that they're sort of like ancient sort of cave painting like drawings of the purgill worked into these maps. But yeah, I was just trying to figure out how they, like, why is she looking at this one and not the one to the right? Like, she's surrounded by these pillars. It's like, they seem very certain that this is the right way to aim. And I just was like, would you be though? So,
If I could just follow up on the time thing a little bit, because that's really great. A great question, because are we actually aiming at where that galaxy is now? Or where it will be when I get there, right? And so that has to be some sort of purgill hyperspace lane, because if I want to throw something at Mars, I don't aim it at Mars right now. I aim it at where it's going to be when it gets there. But Star Wars doesn't really care about time and space travel, so we'll just that.
Yeah, that's okay. Now, for those who aren't as big on the lore, myself included, these maps looked very similar to where Ahsoka then ended up. And James, I was thinking maybe you could sort of differentiate what this plane of existence or dimension is in Star Wars lore.
Well, this is the world between worlds, and we kind of first see this, I believe, in Rebels, and it's exactly what it sounds like. You go in, and it's just basically, you just wander around, and there's kind of like different doorways you can pop out, and it's kind of like a random time machine that you can pop out in different places and different times. But things can still exist within here, and as we see, Ahsoka goes in there and she comes across Anakin that is in there. Or is it him? Or is it just part of her own imagination? But it kind of is like outside of our regular universe.
Right. Don't worry, scientists. There's not any follow-up questions to this about how that could exist. To me, it looks so similar.
Maybe it is sort of a little pocket universe that crosses over in different places, both within space and time, since time is
right.
Not real.
Right, fair enough.
What?
All right, so I know we're going to spend some time on purgill.
I'm very excited.
Yeah, go for it, Gabe.
When I first saw the purgill in Rebels, like a lot of people were like, "Oh, Deus Ex Machina, blah blah blah." I'm like, "Shut up." Purgill are so adorable and everything, but the reason I love them is because they are so inspired by one of my favorite creatures I've studied, and they're whales. I mean, they're literally called space whales, but looking at their behavior, their movement, even their body shape, they tell this beautiful evolutionary story in the world of Star Wars that parallels the evolution of whales. Like, first off, just looking at them, they have this beautiful streamlined, body shape, right, that allows them to fly through different atmospheres or through space. That's a whole different story, but and looking at just close up, that's just a whale face with tentacles on it. And it's so cool. Like on the bottom, they have these dorsal ventral like throat things on there. I can't really name it. Throat grooves. Yeah, it's been a long day. And then what those are used for is in modern rorquals or baleen whales, they have those so that they can filter feed. What they do is this cool mechanism where they open their mouth very wide. And they take huge gulps of water, and in that water is their food, whether it's plankton or krill, and then they're able to sieve that through their baleen, which are like these tiny hair-like structures, these hair-like structures in their mouth to send out the water and then just collect all the food in there. The purgill do very, very similar things, but with Tivana gas, right? That's the thing that they use suppose that they use to travel through hyperspace. So even just the movements of the purgill look so whale-like in the way that they move and undulate through space and the atmosphere. It's super cool. And I think another thing that they really emphasized in Ahsoka was size. Now, whales are the largest animal to ever exist on our planet. We have the blue whale, which is huge, right? Nothing has ever come close to the size. Its blood vessels are big enough for us to crawl through. Its heart is the size of a, what's that car? Volkswagen Bug. Mm-hmm. And that's how big they are. Now, the reason that's cool is because on land, all of us land animals, our size is restricted by something called gravity. There's certain limits of how big we can get, right? But once you remove that limitation, and for whales, that limitation is removed once they moved into the water. Their ancestors moved into the and they were able to get huge because they didn't have the gravity restrictions. it didn't matter how big they got, because if they're on land, their entire body and organs would get crushed by their pure weight. But in the water, they can be like, I'm huge and I'm having a great day. I'm just going to swim through the water. Purgill have no restrictions because they supposedly first evolved on some planet and then evolved to be in zero gravity, right, in the vacuum of space. Without any restrictions, they probably could get huge. And as we saw, they were big enough to fit a ship in its mouth. And I find that so incredible and a great parallel from our whales to our amazing space whales.
Yeah, Sam, I definitely want your follow-up, but for me, the baleen was really exciting to see, or the baleen-like part in Ahsoka, because I wrote an article for Star Wars Insider magazine when just Rebels was out in terms of what we knew about purgill, and I was like, but are they, because they look like baleen whales, right? They don't look like toothed whales, and so it was really exciting when the mouth opened, for even if this isn't really how baleen works in our current whales or whatever, it was still they thought about it, so. Sam, any thoughts about whales?
Yeah, I second what Gabe said. So eloquently, Gabe. But also, I like to ponder the possibilities, right? And when I'm in science fiction, I think about often, again, 2 a.m, what is realistic and what isn't. And I also like to think about, when you look at animals in science fiction, what do we have here on planet Earth that you could draw a parallel to, which we were talking about with Loth, right? So. I think about how cold it is in space, right? And what are the adaptations that a purgill would have that is similar to whales on Earth, because it is very, very cold and very, very deep water as well. Not as cold as space, but still very cold. So I wonder about their structures, right? So do they have something like blubber? And blubber works for whales on planet Earth because there's actually tons of blood vessels in blubber that restricts, when they in cold water, when they dive deep, those blood vessels constrict, and it prevents blood from going to their kind of surface area, so they don't have to warm those areas of their body, and of course it's heavily insulated. And I also think about, for their extremities, something called counter-current heat exchange, and that's where the arteries and the veins are really, really close together, so that as one is coming out from the extremity, which is much colder, right, because it's been away from the center of the body and from the heart, it travels close by the warm blood that's coming from the heart, right, being pumped out there, and it helps warm up that blood, so there's less energy, less heat lost through this. So I really would love to dissect a purgill. Sorry, guys. Dissect, right?
Can we do an episode of that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, honestly, and just to see how these things work.
Well, because, we didn't even know they had bones, really. Right?
Yeah. That was amazing when we saw that. I mean,
would they need bones?
Yes.
Yeah, because that was when they get to the planet.
In the atmosphere where there's gravity.
Yeah, because I was speculating, if it's half whale and half squid, does the front half have bones and the back half just have lots of muscles? So we at least get, a skull. I mean, these are straight up just whale bones. That is absolutely just a right whale or something like that.
I was watching that and I was just like, that's a whale bone.
That's a whale bone. Yeah, just drifting by. Yeah, exactly. So they at least answered half the question, the front half of the question, because there's skulls and ribs.
This is cool because in paleontology, we see this all the time where we have these things in our body and other animals that are relics of our evolutionary history, right? So the space whales, the purgill, could have started as a creature that had bones and evolved past needing it, but it just retained it because it either had some other advantage to giving it support, like Sam said, when it is in atmosphere, but when it's in space, it may not need it. But there are other functions for our bones besides just giving us support. So it retained it somehow in its evolutionary history, and that's another cool thing that I loved when they were like, oh, cool, they have bones, and for me and Sam, our brains are like, okay, evolutionary history. How did it get this way? Why does it have the bones?
Yeah. Well, and I was starting to think about the tentacles too, and I remember reading the headline about how many muscles that elephants have in their trunks. And that sort of seemed like maybe because they can open up these things, it's more than just sort of tentacles, I feel like. But who knows?
Well, one question really quickly, and I know we're taking such a deep dive on this. It's
literally the premise of the panel. You don't have to apologize. These people know what they hear. Right, exactly. Thank you.
Yes. These are my people here. So is there shape, right? So we talked about this earlier, we call this a fusiform shape. So it's kind of torpedo-like because for whales on Earth, right, they're moving through the medium of water. And that actually helps them to sluice through those molecules better, right? Just like when you see cyclists or geese that fly in an arrow, right? There's that one in the front, right? And it kind of like sluices the molecules go past them. We're getting into the physics of it, and you can correct me on this. But I was wondering, which was interesting to me, was like in space, you wouldn't need that because there's no molecules in space to really go through. But now that we know that they go in the atmosphere, go ahead, Paul, you want to weigh in on this one?
Well, actually, it's not so far-fetched to think that there is some sort of interstellar medium or some medium through that permeates space, because when we were talking about the like turbulence and the hyperspace wake turbulence,
right?
So I was remember something there was a building at the Naval Academy that I went to that was named after this guy Michelson. And there was this weird apparatus that was in the basement of this building that I would walk past every day on my way to engineering classes. And it was called the Michelson-Morley experiment. And so this kind of triggered my memory of that. Up until like 1900, it was widely thought, and it was the going theory, like right before Albert Einstein comes along with general theory of relativity and speed of light as a constant, like right before that, there was a predominant theory that there is a medium that is called the interluminal ether or something like that. Like it's a very like turn of the century kind of a phrase, but this ether that was a medium through which light traveled. And the reason why this was thought, and many experiments were done, and they all came up with a null result, which then set the stage for this dude that worked in a mailroom that nobody had ever heard of to propose this weird general, relativity because of those failures. But up until that point, it was widely thought, okay, air it travels in compression waves. Hosts is the medium through which sound travels. Waves on the ocean travel through a medium that is water. So clearly, all of these experiments have been done that show that light is a wave. So light must travel through some sort of medium that's called the ether. And so it's not far-fetched to say that in outer space, there should be some medium through which light is traveling, and that's why ships would look the way that they would. That's the way whales would look the way that they would. That's why something that goes into hyperspace would leave this wake turbulence behind. So it's not all that far-fetched.
Well, maybe they were trying, but they didn't get the experiments right. Maybe if they had some sort of lattice to capture it, like some sort of Ethernet.
We didn't.
I've worked with this guy long enough. I'm like, James is coming up with a pun. It's happening right now. Things are not disappointing.
But I can talk a little bit about the interstellar medium, actually.
All right, let's do it.
So space is much, much emptier than the best vacuum we can achieve on Earth. But it's not a vacuum because we're here having this conversation. So if nothing else, we are imperfections in the vacuum, right? But the average density of space, though, is so empty that there's like one hydrogen atom per cubic centimeter. So it's like taking a dice and one atom being in it. But there are parts of space. When I see that turbulence, I think of parts that are more dense, which are still emptier than the best vacuum here on Earth. But we actually see shock fronts propagating through. So like there are pulsars actually going through, and you can actually see wakes in front of from these bow shocks. So yeah, you can do it.
Nice. Well, Lisa, do you want to ask your question about colorful hyperspace here?
So to the biology people, to the life sciences folks in the room, of which I am not one, why color? Like we've never seen color in the hyperspace before, but we see it here.
Yeah, why is purgill space travel rainbowed and regular ship hyperspace a different color? Any thoughts?
My first hypothesis is that it's because they use some form of organic hyperspeed, right? Like there's some cool breaking thing in their body that they've evolved that allows them to enter these hyperspace lanes naturally. They don't need a hyperspace engine like the rest of the galactic civilization do to induce it artificially. They're able to do something. We don't know the exact mechanisms yet, but that's my magical, beautiful theory of why purgills are just better, because it's pretty natural.
They're just fabulous.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I definitely have an idea about this. I think they're using that color to navigate And the reason why I think this is because there are organisms on Earth that see differently than we do. Everything sees differently than we do, but for instance, birds. So birds are true navigators for a couple of reasons. They use not only their visual cues, right? They navigate by the sun, they navigate by the moon, they use like mapping systems, but they can actually see the magnetic fields. And that's because of a protein that they actually create that's in their cornea, that they can, that light, they see it, it translates something to their brain, and that's how they can truly navigate. So you could take a bird that has never navigated, never flown, never migrated, right, in its life, and you could put it in a dark cage and just like in a room for years, and then release it, and it'll know exactly where to go on its flight path, up, you know, from South America up to Canada.
So if Ahsoka was, if they opened its mouth and Ahsoka looked out, she would see regular hyperspace that we've seen in the movies before, but we're getting the purgill eye view of hyperspace, maybe?
We're getting the purgill eye view.
I love it.
And so they can see a lot more.
That's a great hypothesis.
Yeah, I love it. Why not?
I think this is really important too this is where the really cool parallel to whales comes in again. So whales naturally are very sensitive to the magnetic pole of our planet, right? They use that to migrate hundreds and hundreds of miles across our vast oceans, which is basically like traveling through space. And I thought it was super cool because you pointed out on the purgill, like the purgills on the cool star map, right? So I feel like that they were like aligning themselves to what the purgill are naturally able to align to. And now that you said it, that they're seeing it, they're like seeing their own magnetic spectrum to go to Peridia. Wait. Yeah. Sorry, I'm mixing my games up and shows up. But that's such a cool idea, and again, this amazing parallel. And this is one of my favorite things about Star Wars, right? I'm gonna go on a quick tangent. Is that so much of that world is based in our world, right? And you know, the saying that the real world is stranger than fiction. I find my appreciation of Star Wars and the natural world that they create because I appreciate our world. And you know, after this panel, I hope a lot of you start to see that, right? All the beautiful things that are in our world, and you can see how they inspired all the beautiful things that we love in our nerd world. And we can find the beauty and appreciation in both of them. And I think it's just so cool that they did this for Ahsoka. Yes. When I sat there, I appreciated the show even more. I mean, I love Star Wars when I love paleontology, right? Like, I would quit paleontology in a second if I could work for Star Wars. But the fact that this gives me a different appreciation for the show, right? Yeah. I could even go into this thing called whale falls because of this scene here where whales die and they become these beautiful ecosystems.
We'll circle back if there's time.
Deep underwater.
Yeah.
But I'm not.
But we'll circle back if there's time. But yeah, no, I interviewed one of the concept artists who's worked on more of the Disney Star Wars movies, and he'll just like watch David Attenborough specials about the ocean while designing the creatures. Because it's just like, just make that blue instead of, right? It's like we have weird enough stuff here that it looks alien, especially when you get to ocean stuff.
Check out Terrell Whitlash's
The Field Guide to Star Wars that came out back in the 90s. So good. So, okay. Well, that's right. You also had this is a whale skeleton with the baleen and the ribs, and you can see that it's like they really just used this. They loved it. Yeah, exactly. All right, well, Lisa, we've touched on the rings a little bit and what they're made out of, but I want to know how something like that forms. I mean, I know that we don't have any in our solar system that are made out of whale bones, but right, that's true. Have we looked? But how does that work? How does that form? How prevalent are ringed planets in our universe?
Rings are probably more common than we used to think. Okay, so a lot of people know Saturn has rings, but Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune all have rings. And also 3 other objects in the outer solar system. A couple of asteroids have rings we just discovered in like the last decade, and also one of the other major objects that Haumea has rings. And so one of the things here is how are they made? And the answer is depends which one of these objects I'm talking about. Saturn's rings are so bright because they're mostly ices, and we think they probably formed when an icy object got pulled apart by the gravitational forces on it. However, just recently, within the last month or so, somebody did a computer simulation showing we could get Saturn's rings out of colliding a couple of objects together. And so that makes me think of this sort of purgill graveyard that we see. That if the purgills come back home to die here, and then their skeletons are so huge that they could collide, then we actually could see this. I don't see why this couldn't happen. I mean, if we had purgle that navigated home to do this. I think the complicated thing, and once again, I'm not the life scientist here, is what I know on Earth how bodies decay. How do the whale bodies decay in space and leave just the skeletons behind? But otherwise, all good. I'm fine with it.
Okay. Any thoughts from the biologists about bodies decaying in zero gravity?
I mean, so yeah, in zero gravity, I mean, so you have to have something that will decompose it, right? So whether that's fungi or bacteria here on Earth, but which we think about, oh, really, that's not going to be in space. However, there are creatures that we have on Earth that live through space, right? Tardigrades are one of those little water moles. If you've never seen them, I highly recommend that's what you Google when you're done. And they can actually survive through space, in space. And so maybe there is some sort of, we call them detritivores, right? So those that decompose, right, to get rid of detritus. Maybe there is something in space that does this. And on Earth, we have something called extremophiles too. So we have like bacteria and archaea that live in the deep oceans and the vents, and they actually process things like sulfur, right? Or that live in like the hot pools of Yellowstone, or live in freezing cold temperatures. So maybe there's some sort of extremophile detritivore, we'll put those two together, that's out in space that we aren't aware of that can then decompose.
Well, pulling through my galactic archive here, we do have instances of spacefaring creatures in Star Wars, right? You've got the space slug, you've got Minox. We know that they mostly eat ships and metal, but who's not to say that there's no metallic thing in purgills, right? Because they're spacefaring. So perhaps there's some Minox-like thing that is the equivalent of like a detritivore, or like something that breaks down. We know that there's like a vulture, right? Yeah. And we know that there are silicon-based life forms in Star Wars. And if you want me to explain silicon versus carbon-based, we don't have time. Just know that there are a very different group of organisms in the Star Wars world. But perhaps those are the ones that are able to break down. If you drop Melissa and me, Melissa and Sam there, you would have to. We were not leaving.
No, absolutely not.
We would just spend Sam and Melissa just like taking data. The rest of our lives there.
Yeah. Dream job. James, you have a
mentioned that with Minox and space slugs, what if the bones of the purgills are metal, and so they could just eat it, maybe that's why it like collides like rock, is because it's rock.
Yeah.
And maybe also would a body like a purgill's rot from the inside simply because the cells dying and breaking apart, and whatever bacteria or whatever is in them already might cause some decay?
Yeah, we never make it. We don't really spend a lot of time in there, but I'd love to I would have loved it if there was one like recently deceased purgill in there, just to kind of show us like the progress of it. Like whale falls we talked about.
I'm saying.
Right. Yeah.
It's going to be our documentary pitch. They know someone at Lucas. Sam and I are looking for jobs to do this.
No, it's true. We would never make it to the planet. We would just be stuck in the rings, being like, "What about that one? What about that one?" So yeah.
It's like the danger on Peridian. We're like, what?
Right. Yeah. Leave us out of it. Yeah. We're just here to study the animals. All right. Well, we'll circle back if we end up having time to all of these things. Oh, Lisa, I forgot that you had a lovely Saturn picture. If there was anything else to share about rings, they're pretty. It's true. Paul, you sort of already touched on the hyperspace wake, but if there was anything else, this was originally where it was going to drop it. So if there's anything we didn't get to, this was just, I didn't remember seeing this, and I'm sure I could be wrong. But it was the first time I feel like we stayed behind when things went to hyperspeed where there was wake. And I wasn't sure if that was different because it was the purgill, induced hyperspeed or what kind of likelihood that would happen in space.
Yeah, I mean, for the way that we understand space, probably not. But I mean, it's worth pointing. But also, we don't have any earthly idea, how to even do anything that approaches hyperspace or jumping to hyperspace or generating these what are clearly like these very energetic events that then the ship leaps from one state of existence into another. So clearly a lot of energy is being released in a short amount of time. So these high pulses of power. So what's the analogy that might look like that in aviation at least? Well, it's breaking the sound barrier. And so it's probably worth kind of talking a little bit about that, because this is where Star Wars in the visual storytelling kind of anchors itself in the real world really well. I mean, first of all, if you start kind of at brass tacks, the original A New Hope, shot for shot, the Star Wars, the attack on the Death Star, that's shot for shot taken from some World War II, footage, and so it very much anchors itself in a form of aviation that is rooted in technology from the 40s, where things are very hands-on technology. It's not very computerized, and everything happens at visual range, right? Mm-hmm. So we're already anchoring in this certain kind of technological mode of thinking. So if we extend that here to what we're seeing, we see these ships. Some of them look kind of sleek in Star Wars, and some with very thin wings, and some of them and kind of swept wings, and some of them look like kind of a broader or thicker wings. That's called wing thickness, and the length of the wing is called the chord. So the thickness to chord ratio of a wing, how thick it is determined by in what way you want it to perform. So things that are designed to fly in what's called a subsonic regime, which is slower than the speed of sound. By the way, the speed of sound in your medium, whether it's outer space, water, or air, is determined by the density and the temperature of the medium. So sound travels faster in water and slower in air, and slower still in less dense air. So it's really your proximity or going faster than the speed of sound determines the shape of this vehicle that you're in, right? So things that are very sleek and swept wings and very thin airfoils or space foils, those things inherently to us, they look like they should travel faster, because in the real world that's fighter planes look a certain way because they go faster, whereas airliners look a certain way because they go slower. And you kind of see that with the design of the ships here. So it makes sense, right? All of it tracks, even if it's not rooted in any real space stuff.
Right.
It looks like it works to us because these artists are probably watching, documentaries on aircraft,
right,
while they're designing all of these things. And so the form follows the function for all of these.
Right, okay.
Virgin evolution.
Yeah. James, I want to go through a couple more of the lore references. I mean, I don't know how many people in this room have watched the Rebels or all of Clone Wars, but I definitely had to okay, all right, decent amount, I guess, if you're here at 6 p.m. talking about the Science of Ahsoka. So maybe nobody else, yeah. So maybe no one else needs the sort of primer or whatever, but there was enough stuff in here where it was well, who is that? And then I just wanted also an excuse to share my favorite fun fact, which is that Hu Yang canonically arrived in a TARDIS. Voiced by David Tennant, that's written into one of the Star Wars books, that Hu Yang arrived at the Jedi Temple in a big blue box thousands of years ago. So James, I have a couple slides up here. If you can tell us just briefly about sort of who some of these characters are. So I have Hu Yang and also Baylan.
Hu Yang, as you know, voiced by David Tennant, he originally appeared in Clone Wars in an arc kind of with the young Jedi Knights of the time. That Ahsoka is with a bunch of younglings and they get kidnapped by Hondo, and it's a great adventure because Hondo's in it, and Hondo is awesome. But so Hu Yang's been around for thousands of years. I think that slide says something like maybe 25,000 years.
I don't remember if it's it doesn't specify anything.
But so he's really seen a lot of things, and it's really cool that you see in Ahsoka that he's got this little lightsaber room that he has all the parts and he can reach everywhere to get it, and that's something we've seen in Clone Wars, that he's been helping students make their lightsabers, and it's a very personal, custom thing. But he's probably knows more about making lightsabers, obviously than anyone. That he's probably seen every single kind of style and can recommend. It's like, oh, this is your temperament, this is your personality. These are maybe the parts that you want.
Nice.
Hu Yang is really cool, and to see him on the show is a real treat.
Yeah. Yeah, and then Baylan, I mean, honestly, Baylan was maybe my most interesting character from Ahsoka, and I'm sorry to hear that the actor passed away, and there's probably not more to this, more that we're going to get of this story. But tell us a little bit about what you know about him and about what this ending in Ahsoka means.
Well, Baylan, former Jedi turned mercenary, basically saw that the Jedi got wiped out, and he's like, okay, there are obviously some pitfalls there, so maybe try a different way of being. What's interesting with Baylan and Shin, their last names are Skull and Hati, and those actually come from Norse mythology. That Skull is the wolf that chases the sun, whereas Hati is the wolf that chases the moon, and typically they're brothers, but and they will finally catch their quarries at Ragnarok, at the end of the world, the end of the universe. So it kind of plays a little symbolism here that Baylan is going off, to chase his son, essentially, the light that you see at the end. And will he get there? We don't know. Maybe at the end of the universe.
Cool.
But yeah, but what we see here with him is a statue of the father, and the father and the daughter. The daughter and the son are from the Mortis arc in the Clone Wars. It was a really trippy story. Anakin and Obi-Wan and Ahsoka end up in this place that has like little floating things, like it's Super Mario World or something. But that's when Liam Neeson came back to do the voice of Qui-Gon for the first time. But it was very interesting. It kind of turned Star Wars mythology on its head. And then we see things like this back in Rebels, where there's more references to them. That the daughter kind of represents the light side, the balance there. The son kind of represents the dark side, and so there's tension between them. And the father is the one to keep that balance between them, and he tries to pass that off onto Anakin, and saying, "This is what your prophecy is really about."
I have always wondered.
And then Anakin is like, yeah, I don't think I want to do that. I thought you wanted the sun. No, that's maybe.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so, but having this come in, it's like, here's a planet where they have giant, like, Lord of the Rings size statues of the father, and, looking off the distance. So it's like, clearly the morticians, for lack of a better name, their influence extends all the way back here. Maybe is this where they came from? This is the galaxy they came from. Obviously, did the Night Sisters come from here? The Purgill come from here. It asks a lot of questions about how the regular galaxy far away, not the galaxy far away.
Right. I've been calling it farther away.
Farther?
Yeah. All right, well, I had some slides about magic and undead stormtroopers, but we're going to skip through those unless there ends up being a question about it, because I want to make sure we give time for Paul to tell us about the martial arts and the fighting sequences that he's familiar with and how that's represented in Ahsoka.
Yeah, clearly Dave Filoni is taking inspiration from, you pick, right? Kurosawa movies, anime, right? And one of the things that I love is when you look at broad strokes, like this is a great shot, and that it looks like something from a Kurosawa movie, just the way it's shot, right, with the two figures in it, just kind of centered. It looks like a painting, right? But then you look down to the details. This is something that I didn't put a screenshot in, but there is a glimpse, I want to say in the second, maybe the third episode in the series, where you see a close-up of Ahsoka's lightsaber. And there are these designs on it that look just like sukamaki, which are the wrappings, the traditional wrappings around the sword hilt of a katana. And there's these diamonds, but you kind of squint at it, and it's like, oh, this is clearly the tsuka of a katana or an iai of some kind. And so it's just wonderful. And then when you look at the actual movements and the stances in Japanese martial arts, in martial art that I have studied called kobudo, which is literally the old way. It's the ways of fighting that were passed down literally from village to village, written on scrolls that were called densho, and it was all just passed through word of mouth. So these different schools of fighting, that I'm not enough of a lightsaber nerd, but I know like Ataru is like one of them. It's a very acrobatic leaping style. Like there's different styles. In the Star Wars universe, the reality, or at least the analog that we have from the world of martial arts is it literally was things were passed down because you did not die. And the groups of people who were clustered in this village over that hill learned in a very specific way than this other village over here. So the forms that we see, stances are called kamae in Japanese martial arts. They are roughly analogous to like poses in yoga, right? But they are not determined by a certain move or a certain like scripted set of movements. They're built around a feeling. So this kamae that we see Ahsoka use is called Daijodan. And the feeling that I was taught that you should embody when you're in Daijodan, it is literally to come at me, bro. Feeling. The only thing that's going to happen after I take this stance is I'm going to cut you down in one cut. And that cut is called karatakawari, which means to split bamboo. It means a cut that is so true and precise it will cut directly through the middle of bamboo. And so when you see this kind of deployed in this fight scene here, and Sam will testament, like I just shouted out loud as soon as she took that stance. And it's very brief, right? It happens very, very briefly. And it really tracks because it's beautifully shot. You can tell that the choreographers really know their stuff in this. But it all weaves together because it's a Japanese style. It is not a showy sports tournament Japanese style. It's like an actual fighting style. And when we see her take the stance, it's like, oh, something's going to happen. And sure enough, it does. And so this was my little like nerd glee, squeal that I saw when I saw this. It's just another part of how in the Star Wars universe, they pull together stuff from our universe and they put it together in ways where it's alien and cool and futuristic. Right. But also it's legit. It tracks. It feels good because it's based and grounded in real stuff. So
yeah.
What did you think about Balin's skull spin? That I definitely have not been practicing.
There is Balin's moves are very so there's a historical European Martial Arts Association, HEMA, right? I'm seeing some head nods. They're kind of like the successors to SCA, right? They do legit research into like pouring through weird tomes of Italian Sword Academy, printouts from the Renaissance, and so a lot of what he was doing was a HEMA style, like a HEMA like broadsword style, and that was one of the other things that I loved is they made the two work together, and this is of course every nerd's dream to see like who would win, European broadsword versus katana.
Yeah.
Probably the European broadsword because katanas are made the way that they are because their iron and their steel was trash. So they did the best with what they had with their resources. But yeah, I love that scene. Yeah.
All right. Well, I have plenty more questions, but I want to open up to audience questions. Yes.
It's not a Star Wars question, but I'm very curious about rings on planets, and I was wondering, is it more common to see rings on gas giants, or is it more, or can you see rings on rocky planets like Earth? Is there a difference in how they're made?
That is a fantastic question, and the answer is yes to both, but the time scales, because rings are ephemeral. Rings are not permanent. So we think Jupiter's rings are only about 1 million years old, Saturn's rings are probably about less than 100 million, and geologists and astronomers, less than 100 million. The Earth probably had a ring, it just formed into the moon after that Mars-sized object collided, kicked up debris, and then it formed, and formed into the moon. And so we didn't, one of the things I love about astronomy is it keeps you humble, because you'll think you have it down. It's like, okay, I can tell you why the giant planets have it, because the gravitational differential at those distances wouldn't let anything coagulate, and there's this asteroid, and it's got a ring. And so it's a little thing, and we got to figure it out. And that's probably debris that got kicked up from a collision and went into orbit, and it just hasn't been long enough for it to disperse or fall back down yet. So anything can have a ring. It's the time scale based on its gravitational influence, which makes you think like, oh, well, Peridium, however it's called in this one, has to have a low gravity, maybe, because our heroes and our villains can walk on it. So that graveyard is also ephemeral.
Okay.
Last one.
All right. Thank you. Other nerdy questions? Yes?
Well, question. This idea that they had of the returning to the grounds. That reminded me so much of elephants.
Yeah.
Oh.
And then you're discussing about how the elephants have these muscles and how that might have been tied into how they generate through enough speed or whatever for hyperspace. So I was wondering if maybe that they're pulling that in, because obviously they use whales, but it looks like they added a couple of things in there. They grafted on a little bit of elephant.
Yeah, because at least for me, the animated purgill really looked like the back half of squid. But in this one, I felt much more like the elephant trunk sort of motif to it. And I forgot about elephant graveyards. I think I learned that from The Lion King.
Here's like the cool thing about, the way we think of evolution in our world, right? There are so many structures that are convergent. So these muscles, they're ring-like structures in our muscle that, in the same from like the squid to the elephant. So it's convergent. They're not related to each other, but they work the same, right? And then the other cool thing is, when it comes to creature design, a good creature designer pulls from what we know about our planet, right? So whoever was the creature designer for the purgill, they looked at all these different things and found ways for them to be believable, right? The most important thing when it comes to creature design is not realism, it's believability, right? If you approach realism, you're not creature designing, you're just redrawing what exists. But when you're designing creatures for the purgill, of course they pulled from many different things, and of course use their imagination as well to create. So it's so plausible that they could have pulled from elephants, squid, whales, all these other cool things, and just like added their own little fine touch to it, like purgill, done.
Yeah, and from some of the interviews that I've done too, straight from sort of George Lucas's, visual vocabulary for Star Wars is, it should look alien, but also within 2 seconds, you should know what you're looking at, right? Like, am I looking at an animal? Am I looking at a sentient species? Am I looking at a ship? Am I looking at a droid? Those sorts of things. They should still be instantly recognizable, even if alien. So that fits in.
Because we want something that we can relate to, right? And if it's way too alien, then, we can't relate to it in any way. We don't care about it.
Right.
We can't understand it, right?
And there's definitely that need, especially in Star Wars, for a bit of a cute factor.
Fair enough.
But combining these two questions, it's like, the purgill loved Perugia so much they put a ring on it.
Thank you. I was formulating, somewhere in there was a Beyonce reference and I didn't get to it, so thank you, James. All right, any other questions from our audience? Yes, back in back.
So, science folks, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we need oxygen for fire, and you had a shot up there of an explosion of a starship in space. So is the theory that we're supposed to suspend reality, because explosions are real, regardless of where they're at, or would there potentially be the size of the explosion would be dependent on the amount of oxygen in the thing that blew up?
Oh, Lisa or Paul maybe on this one?
Well, there's explosions in space that don't involve oxygen. So like when a supernova goes off. So you're talking about combustion. If there's combustion, I could totally see air in the craft helping to fuel that. But yeah, so that's how oxygenated combustion works here on Earth. But supernovae, they just blow up, which are great.
And another thing to consider too is and you can see it here with if you watch a SpaceX or any other rocket launch, as the rocket is leaving the pad, it's in this dense atmosphere, right? And so the same combustion effect is happening. And so what you see this like this towering plume, right? And there's a lot of smoke and there's a lot of combustion, after effects. And then and you can see this a lot with the, those like space squid, Instagram photos that people are showing of the SpaceX rocket as it's way, way high up in the atmosphere and the sun is shining on it. And it looks like this big jellyfish, right? This big, wide plume. And so what's happening is the same combustion is happening, but the back pressure, right? The surrounding pressure in the atmosphere is getting less and less. And so you get this very bell-shaped kind of exhaust plume. So you'll still see combustion, you'll still see things that are explosions, but in the Star Wars world, depending on, how they're feeling that day, it'll look like something that looks like, fireworks exploding in, a one standard atmospheric environment here. but really what you would see is something more splashy and wide because there's no back pressure. So you would still see an explosion. It would just be look more like a jellyfish than a typically flamey explosion. A very technical aspect, but yeah.
All right, so just in case they kick us out of here because it is 7 o'clock, I want to thank all of my panelists, but we'll stick around until they kick us out of the building to keep answering questions. But thank you guys for being on the panel. Thank you all for coming. Like I said, stick around and keep asking us questions until they kick us out of here. Yeah, go ahead.
So when it comes to the ring, they had a whole spiff about how they needed specifically 3 engines in order to make that journey with the
And that ring is really big. That is a huge structure.
Exactly. And I was going to ask, and even for the physicists, do you think that is a more viable structure, like a structurally sound vehicle to travel, or something like the Death Star, like a more miniaturized version?
Wow. Okay. So the Death Star as a sphere, I think, would be more stable to build because all that mass would naturally be stable in that spherical shape, right? So, and
we don't have atmosphere, right? So that's not.
And so it's not. Well, if you're traveling really fast, even through a not very dense interstellar medium, you still kind of care about being streamlined because you don't want all this frontal surface to ablate. Right, because there's still stuff. There's not much, but if you're traveling really, really quickly, then the effect would still be, approach like friction, heat buildup, ablate. You ablate, the forward surfaces of the whatever craft it was. So you probably want something that is streamlined or has a streamlined kind of shape to it. So a Death Star kind of, not the best, but it's maybe more stable from a structural standpoint. A ring just kind of looks cool, but why do you need to put these hyperspace engines in this concentric kind of symmetrical shape? Maybe there's something about the way you travel through hyperspace where you need to do that. But again,
it did look really cool.
For me, the way I look at it is the first time we see them is in the prequels, and we see them with these really sleek Jedi starfighters, and to me that's just like, okay, because these are also atmospheric craft. Right. So those atmospheric craft, they cannot hold a lot of fuel. So I think of it in terms of how much fuel do I have to convert to energy to get into hyperspace. So that's how I look at it. So I kind of really like those rings because it indicates like, oh yeah, this little Cessna thing, it can't carry.
Yeah, that was my initial thought. Was like the Eye of Sion is basically a Jedi interceptor hyperspace ring, but instead of a tiny interceptor, it's for something much bigger and triangular. The Chimera, the Star Destroyer, they're going to bring it back, and
Oh yeah, they don't
Chimera doesn't have the ability to travel through hyperspace between galaxies, but this ring does.
Right.
So it's like a stage on a rocket.
Right. Yeah. It didn't have to be a ring to get there, but it's the ring.
Super fast one. And what else is interesting about the Eye of Sion that it's kind of a double reference that Sion in Star Wars there was a Darth Sion. A long time ago, so a dark side thing, but also, Sion, it is kind of a reference to, kind of, in the Bible, there's a Sion as well, that is the name that we get the word Zion from, but it's for Jerusalem, the holy city, so it's kind of got a mythical aspect as well as a Star Wars dark side aspect.
Well, that goes back to the father, daughter, son architecture.
Kind of Tatooine-based question. So obviously, Tatooine has 2 suns. So how do you think that there could be a galaxy out there or a planet that does have 2 suns?
Lisa knows the answer.
We've observed them. They exist. They absolutely do. We've observed them because binary star systems are fairly common. We've actually seen systems with 2 planets around them. We've actually seen one system, I think, that's 2 binary star systems that orbit each other, and we've found planets around. What? We know of over 5,500 extrasolar planets at this point, and yes, some of them. The sad thing about the first Tatooine one that was discovered is that it's a gas giant, so no loop with binary suns playing behind, and we haven't found a terrestrial planet yet around a binary star.
But two binary star systems, and they're going around each
over
other.
extremely long times.
That wraps up this episode of Star Warsologies. We want to thank our panelists, Sam, Gabe, Paul, and Lisa, and we want to thank all of you for listening to one of our Los Angeles Comic-Con panels.
If you're looking for any links we talked about or want to follow our guests on social media, check out our show notes page, which is available at skywalkingthroughneverland.com/star-warsologies. And also check out our YouTube channel, where I'm going to post this episode with related visuals from Star Wars in the next couple of weeks, but we've got some other episodes there already.
If you have an idea for a topic for Star Warsologies or know an expert we should interview, let us know at Star Warsologies on Twitter and Instagram, or at starwarsologies@gmail.com.
We also have a fan group on Facebook, cleverly named Star Warsologies Podcast Fan Group. So if you join it today and chat with us and your fellow listeners, and you can also ask us any more Ahsoka questions there, because we know there are more out there. And please also rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite service, and share it with your friends.
No topic is off limits, even the resale value of X-34 Landspeeders after the XP-38s came out.
We are part of the Skywalking Network, where you can also find a variety of other great shows about Star Wars, Disney, and Marvel, including Talking Apes, the Neverland Clubhouse, and the flagship show Skywalking Through Neverland. There's also a YouTube show called Today in Star Wars History. You can find all of that at skywalkingnetwork.com.
See you next time on Star Warsologies, when we'll share our other panel from LA Comic-Con, a conversation with science advisors who work on sci-fi shows and movies. Comic-Con!
Comic-Con!